At the New Year's Eve dinner table, my daughter-in-law handed me a laminated badge that read, Observer. Her parents, sitting in the seats that used to be mine, laughed as if it were the funniest joke of the decade. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to say that his father, the man who paid for the roof over their heads, deserved a seat at the table. Instead, my son smirked arrogantly, took a sip of his $500 wine and said, "Food is for family, Dad, and tonight is a business dinner." There was no chair for me. I threw the badge onto the fine china, the sound ringing out like a gunshot in the silent room, and I said 4 words that would turn their millionaire lifestyles to dust. Before I tell you what those 4 words were and how I dismantled their entire world, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. It helps this old man share his story. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm Henry Sutton. I'm 77 years old, and for 40 years I was a structural engineer. I know how to build skyscrapers that withstand earthquakes, and I know how to spot a crack in the foundation before the whole building collapses. But I never saw the cracks in my own family until it was too late. It was New Year's Eve in the most exclusive zip code in the city. Outside, a blizzard was burying the driveway under 2 feet of snow. But inside the mansion I had bought for my son Carter 5 years ago, it was warm and smelled like money. My money. I stood in a corner of the massive living room holding a glass of tap water, because the vintage champagne was apparently reserved for the important guests. I watched the staff carry trays of beluga caviar and truffle tarts. I did the mental math as I watched. The catering alone cost more than my first house. The floral arrangements, massive white orchids imported from somewhere tropical, cost more than my annual medical deductible, and every single cent came from the trust fund I had set up. The room was full of people I barely knew. Most were associates of my son Carter, who liked to call himself a real estate tech mogul, even though he had never laid a brick or written a line of code in his life. But the guests of honor were undoubtedly the Castles, the parents of my daughter-in-law Chloe. They were loud, flashy people who wore their wealth like armor. Mr. Castle wore a velvet tuxedo jacket that looked ridiculous, and Mrs. Castle was draped in so much gold jewelry she jingled when she walked. I watched them strut around the living room, touching the artwork, critiquing the view, acting like they owned the place. In a way they did, because my son had handed them the keys to the kingdom, while I was relegated to the guest house at the back of the property. I had arrived early wearing my best suit, the one I wore to my wife Beatrice's funeral 5 years ago. It was a little tight around the waist now, and the style was outdated, but it was respectful. I wanted to ring in the new year with my family. I wanted to feel like I still belonged. When the dinner bell rang, a soft chime echoing through the high ceilings, the group moved toward the dining room. I followed a few steps behind, my joints aching from the damp cold. The dining room was spectacular. A 20-foot mahogany table was set with crystal and silver. There were name cards at every setting, calligraphy on heavy cardstock. I scanned the table looking for my name. I assumed I'd be near Carter, or maybe at the far end. I didn't care about the hierarchy. I just wanted to sit down. I saw Mr. and Mrs. Castle take the seats to the right and left of the head of the table. Chloe sat at the foot. And then I saw the head of the table, the seat of authority, the seat I had occupied at every holiday since Carter was a boy. It was empty. Naturally, I walked toward it. It was instinct. I was the patriarch. I was the one who signed the check for this house. I was the one who wired millions of dollars to Carter to start his company. As I put my hand on the back of the chair, a hand shot out and stopped me. It was Chloe. She was wearing a silver dress that cost more than my car, and her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. She didn't look at me with affection. She looked at me the way a manager looks at a rogue employee. "Dad, what do you think you're doing?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet, but loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I'm sitting down for dinner, Chloe," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, sweetie, no. This year is different. This is a strategy dinner. We're discussing the future of Sutton Innovations. We have investors here." She gestured to her parents, the Castles, who beamed with pride. I looked around. Everyone was staring. The waiters had stopped pouring water. The room was dead silent. "I am the founder of the capital that built this company," I said, my engineer's voice coming out objective and hard. "Technically, you're retired," Chloe corrected me, pulling something from the pocket of her dress. It was a plastic badge on a lanyard, the kind you get at a cheap conference. She pressed it against my chest. It read, "Observer," in bold black letters. You're an observer now, Dad. We need people who are actively contributing to the future to sit at the table. My parents are investing in the new assisted living project. They are players. You're done. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at the badge. Observer. Not father, not grandfather, not benefactor. Just a spectator in the life I had paid for. I looked at the Castles. Mrs. Castle took a sip of her wine and whispered something to her husband, and they both chuckled. It was a dismissive, cruel sound. Then I looked at Carter, my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man I had saved from bankruptcy 3 times before he turned 30. He was sitting there twirling his fork, refusing to meet my eyes. Carter, I said. He finally looked up. His eyes were empty. He looked annoyed, as if my presence was a stain on his perfect evening. Chloe is right, Dad, he said. What did you say? I asked, giving him one last chance to be a man. I said she's right. Carter repeated, his voice louder, now bolstered by his wife's cruelty. Look, Dad, the food is expensive. It's for family and shareholders, people who bring value to the table. You can grab a plate and sit on the couch in the living room. We'll come say Happy New Year after dessert. The room erupted in polite, nervous laughter, led by the Castles. They were laughing at me. Henry Sutton. A man who had built bridges that carried millions of cars. A man who had built a legacy. They were treating me like a senile dog that needed to be fed scraps in the other room. I looked at the badge in my hand. I looked at the feast on the table. Roast duck, lobster, vintage wine, all bought with the sweat of my brow, with the hours I spent on construction sites, while other fathers played golf. I looked at Chloe, smug and triumphant. I looked at Carter, a coward in a $3,000 suit. Something inside me broke. It wasn't a hot, fiery snap. It was the cold, metallic snap of a steel cable finally giving way under too much tension. I realized in that second that I no longer had a son. I had a parasite. And you don't negotiate with parasites. You exterminate them. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I didn't cry. I straightened my back, ignoring the ache in my spine. I took the plastic badge and dropped it onto the empty porcelain plate at the head of the table. Clank. The sound was sharp and final. The laughter died instantly. I looked directly at Carter. He flinched. I am pulling the plug. I said 4 simple, direct words. Carter frowned in confusion. Chloe rolled her eyes. What does that even mean, Dad? Stop being dramatic. Chloe sighed. Go to the couch. I didn't answer. I turned my back to them. I walked out of the dining room across the marble foyer I had paid for and pulled open the heavy front door. The wind hit me like a physical blow. The snow was blowing horizontally now. A whiteout. Dad, wait! You can't drive in this! Carter called out half-heartedly from the dining room. He didn't get up. He didn't follow me. I stepped out into the storm. My truck, a 10-year-old Ford I kept because it was reliable, was the only modest vehicle in a driveway full of luxury imports and sports cars. It was covered in snow. I wiped the windshield with my bare hand, the cold biting my skin, waking me up. I climbed in and turned the key. The engine roared to life with a harsh, angry growl. I looked back at the house one last time. Through the massive front windows, I could see them. Chloe was laughing again, pouring more wine. Carter was talking to Mr. Castle. They had already forgotten me. They thought I was just an old man throwing a tantrum. They thought I would drive to the guest house, eat a sandwich, and apologize in the morning so I could keep my $2,000 a month allowance. They were wrong. I put the truck in gear and drove down the long, winding driveway past the security gates and out onto the main road. I didn't turn toward the guest house. I turned toward the highway. I was leaving, and I wasn't just leaving the party. I was leaving the life I had built for them. As I drove through the blinding snow, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my mind wasn't on the cold. It was on the document I had signed 5 years ago. The document Chloe and Carter thought was a deed of gift. The document they had never bothered to read closely because they were too busy counting the zeros. I remembered the fine print. I remembered the clause my old lawyer Kate had insisted on including. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. It rang 4 times. Hello. A sharp, groggy female voice answered. It was New Year's Eve near midnight. Kate, it's Henry, I said. There was a pause. Henry Sutton? she asked, her voice instantly waking up. Yes, I need you to open a file tonight. Henry, it's midnight. Can it wait until tomorrow? I cleared my throat. No, I said, watching the lights of the exclusive zip code fade in my rearview mirror. They took my seat, Kate. They called me an observer. I heard the click of a lighter on the other end of the line, followed by a long exhale. I told you, Henry. I told you that woman was a viper. You were right, I admitted. I'm ready to execute the rider. The rider? Kate asked, and I could hear the smile in her voice. The demand note. Yes, I want everything back. The house, the company, the cash, everything. Henry, that's the nuclear option. If we do that, they'll be bankrupt. They'll be on the street. I looked at the empty passenger seat where my wife Beatrice used to sit. I thought about the badge, observer. They made me a stranger in my own home, Kate. So let's see how they survive as strangers to my bank account. Meet me at the Route 27 diner in an hour, Kate said. Bring the paperwork. I hung up. The road ahead was dark and treacherous, but for the first time in 5 years, I knew exactly where I was going. I was no longer an observer. I was the engineer, and I was about to demolish the unstable structure I had foolishly built, brick by ungrateful brick. I woke up to the rhythmic piercing beep of a garbage truck backing up in the parking lot outside. The sound cut through the thin walls of the cheap motel like a drill, dragging me from a restless sleep. For a moment I was disoriented by the scratchy, unfamiliar polyester blanket and the smell of stale cigarette smoke that seemed baked into the carpet. I forgot where I was. I instinctively reached out to the other side of the bed, expecting the high thread count sheets of my guest house. But my hand hit the cold, hard edge of a nightstand with cigarette burns in the laminate. Then the memory of the night before crashed down on me. The blizzard, the badge, the laughter. I sat up. My 77-year-old joints protested against the cheap mattress. The room was gray and dim lit only by the sliver of winter light fighting its way through the heavy rubber curtains. I sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed my face with my hands. My skin felt rough. I hadn't packed a razor. I hadn't packed anything really, just the clothes on my back and my wallet. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. It was fully charged. The only thing in my life currently operating at full capacity. I hesitated before unlocking it, bracing myself for the barrage of notifications. But the screen was surprisingly clear. No missed calls from the night before. No frantic voicemails wondering if I had frozen to death in the storm. Just a low battery warning and a notification from my banking app. I tapped the bank icon, my finger hovering over the screen. I knew the number would be low, but seeing it in stark black and white pixels was a physical blow. $451. That was the sum total of Henry Sutton's liquid assets. A man who had once employed 200 people. A man who had signed checks for millions without blinking. Now I had enough for maybe 3 more nights in this motel and a tank of gas. I stared at the number, letting the humiliation wash over me. It wasn't just about being broke. It was about the absolute loss of control. I was an engineer who had forgotten to secure his own foundation. I got up and walked into the tiny bathroom. The fluorescent light flickered and buzzed, casting a sickly green pallor over my reflection in the mirror. I looked old. Not distinguished, not wise, just old and tired. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to erase the image of Mr. Castle laughing at me, trying to wash away the feeling of that plastic badge catching on my lapel. I needed coffee. Real coffee. Not that powdered stuff next to the ice bucket. But before I could even put my shoes on, my phone started buzzing. The screen lit up with a photo I had taken years ago. Carter smiling on his graduation day, wearing the gown I had paid for, holding the diploma I had made sure he received. My thumb hovered over the decline button. I didn't want to hear his voice. I didn't want to hear the excuses, but I needed to know. I needed to gauge the structural integrity of the bridge I was about to burn. I swiped my finger across the screen and held the phone to my ear. I didn't say anything. I just listened. "Dad, where are you?" Carter asked. His voice wasn't filled with concern. It was thick with irritation. The tone you use with a disobedient child who wandered off in a supermarket. "I'm safe," I said, my voice raspy from disuse. "Safe?" Carter scoffed. "You made a whole scene, Dad. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" Chloe's parents were shocked. They flew in from out of town for a nice evening for a business strategy dinner. And you threw a temper tantrum like a toddler over a seating chart. A temper tantrum, I repeated, looking around the grim motel room. You took my seat, Carter. You sat there and watched your wife humiliate me. She wasn't humiliating you. She was organizing the event. Carter snapped. He was doing it again. Twisting reality, manipulating me, making me doubt my own eyes. It was a joke, Dad. Corporate humor. You used to have a sense of humor before you got so old. We were just trying to define roles. You're retired. You're an observer. It's not an insult. It's a fact. It felt like an insult, I said quietly. That's because you're too sensitive lately, he said, his voice dropping into a condescending register. Look, you ruined the vibe. The Castles are very upset. They're reconsidering their investment because they think there's instability in the family. You need to fix this. I need to fix this? I asked, tightening my grip on the phone. Yes, you need to come back today. No, take a day to cool off, but come back tomorrow. Apologize to Chloe. Apologize to the Castles. Tell them you were just tired or having a bad reaction to medication, whatever. Just smooth things over. You should be grateful, Dad. Grateful that Chloe even agrees to keep you in the guest house after how difficult you've been. Most kids put their parents in nursing homes. We keep you on the estate. We take care of you. The words hit me like a physical slap. Grateful. He wanted me to be grateful for the privilege of living in a shed behind the mansion I bought. He wanted gratitude for the scraps they threw me. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I couldn't blow up. Not yet. An engineer doesn't bring down a building by swinging a hammer wildly. He finds the stress points. He plants the charges.
I'll think about it, Carter, I said, my voice flat.
Good, he said, sounding relieved, assuming he had won. Assuming I was the same weak old man he had been managing for 5 years. Don't take too long. We have a brunch scheduled for Sunday. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, the silence of the room rushing back in. He hadn't asked if I was cold. He hadn't asked if I had eaten. He had only issued his mission. Before I could put the phone down, it buzzed again. A text message. It was from Chloe. I opened it. No greeting. No pleasantries. Just a transactional threat. If you don't issue a formal apology to my parents by tomorrow night, we are reviewing the monthly stipend. $2,000 is a lot of money for someone who brings nothing to this household. Think carefully about who puts food in your fridge. I read the message twice, then I left. It was a dry, humorless sound that rattled in my chest. They were threatening to cut off my allowance. My own money funneled back to me in an insultingly small drip. And they were threatening to turn off the tap. It was the leverage they thought they had, the leash they used to keep the old dog in the yard. I tossed the phone onto the bed and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain to look out at the gray slush-covered parking lot. A beat-up Honda Civic was parked next to my truck. A young couple was arguing inside, their breath fogging the glass. I watched them, but I wasn't seeing them. I was seeing 5 years into the past. I was seeing the day the foundation cracked. It started with Beatrice. When she died, the silence in our home was deafening. I was a structural engineer, a man of logic and physics. But grief doesn't follow the laws of physics. It's a chaotic force. It destabilized me. I felt like a building swaying in a hurricane without a dampener. I was 72. I was mourning and suddenly terrified of my own mortality. I looked at my assets, the company I had built from the ground up, Sutton Structural Solutions. It was worth $15 million. It was my life's work. But then I looked at Carter. He was 35 back then, struggling to get his real estate tech startup off the ground. He was always asking for loans, always one deal away from making it big. I wanted to help him. I wanted to see him succeed while I was still alive to witness it. And I was afraid of taxes, estate taxes that would eat up 40% of everything if I died with the assets in my name. I wanted to be smart. I wanted to protect the family legacy. So I sold my company for $15 million in cash. I remember the day the wire transfer hit. It felt like a victory. Then came the restructuring. I sat down with Carter and Chloe. They were so solicitous then, so caring. They brought me dinner every night. They helped me organize Beatrice's clothes. They suggested I shouldn't have to worry about managing money anymore. They said I should enjoy my golden years. I gave Carter $10 million. It was meant to be seed capital for his company and the funds to buy the house in the exclusive zip code. A multi-generational home, they called it. A place where we would all live together. I kept $5 million for myself, but I put it in a family trust. It was a standard vehicle for assets protection. But this was where the cracks began. The hairline fractures I ignored because I was blinded by love and grief. I made Carter the trustee. I gave him power of attorney. I told myself it was practical. If I got sick, if I declined mentally, he would need to be able to pay the bills. I trusted him. He was my son, Beatrice's son. I never imagined a scenario where my own flesh and blood would lock me out of the account. I never imagined he would use my own trust fund to buy the loyalty of his wife's parents while starving his father out. I realized now, standing in that cheap motel room, that I hadn't just lost a seat at the dinner table. I hadn't just lost my dignity. I had systematically dismantled my own power and handed the rubble to the people who wanted to bury me. I wasn't just a victim of their cruelty. I was the architect of my own prison. They didn't see me as a father. They didn't even see me as a person. I was a line item on a spreadsheet, a liability, a bad debt they were hoping to write off. The realization was cold and heavy, settling in my stomach like wet concrete. I had been an observer. Yes, I had watched my own erasure and mistaken it for retirement. But as I watched the snow turn to slush in the parking lot, a spark of the old Henry ignited. The engineer. The man who solved problems that looked impossible. I had built skyscrapers on swamps. I had reinforced bridges that were on the verge of collapse. I stepped away from the window and picked up my phone again. The battery was at 12%. I didn't care. I wasn't going to apologize. I wasn't going to beg for my $2,000. I was going to find the blueprints. Every structure has a weakness. Every contract has a loophole. And I was going to find the one I had buried in the foundation of their lives 5 years ago. I put my coat on. It was time to stop observing and start the demolition. I sat on the edge of the motel bed with my phone in my hand, staring at a contact entry that had been renamed 5 years ago. It no longer said Kate O'Malley. It said, "Do not call. Per Chloe." I remembered the day I changed it. It was a week after I transferred the assets. Chloe had walked into my study with a tray of tea and a look of concern. She told me Kate was toxic. She said Kate was jealous of our family. She said she was trying to drive a wedge between Carter and me to keep billing hours. She said they needed a modern lawyer. Someone who understood tech startups, not a dinosaur who specialized in construction contracts. I had listened. I had nodded. And I had fired the woman who had protected my business for 30 years. My thumb hovered over the call button. I felt a wave of shame so hot it prickled my neck. Calling her now was an admission of total defeat. It was admitting I was the fool Chloe probably thought I was. But I had $450 to my name and a burning need for payback that outweighed my pride. I pressed the button. It rang once, twice. I expected voicemail. It was a holiday after all. But on the third ring, the line clicked open. "Start talking, Henry," a voice said. It was dry, sharp, and sounded like sandpaper on concrete. "Kate," I said, my voice failing me for a second. "I assume this is Henry Sutton, the man who fired me via email 5 years ago because his daughter-in-law thought my jacket was out of style," she said. I could hear the clatter of plates in the background. "I was wrong, Kate." There was silence on the line. It stretched for 5 seconds. 10. I held my breath. "You're damn right you were wrong," she finally said. "But I saw the news, or rather I didn't see the news. I checked the obituaries this morning like I always do, and you weren't in them. So why are you calling me on New Year's Day?" They took my seat, Kate. Literally. I heard a long, tired sigh. "Meet me at Lou's Diner on 4th Street, the one with the flickering neon sign. And Henry, you're buying the coffee, even if you have to dig for quarters in your truck seats." I hung up and gathered my things. I left the motel, keeping the keycard as a reminder of how low I had fallen. The drive to Lou's was a blur of gray slush and dirty snowbanks. The diner was a relic from the 50s that hadn't seen a renovation in decades. It smelled like bacon grease and old vinyl. I spotted Kate immediately in a back booth. She was in her 50s, but she had the energy of a woman half her age and the eyes of an apex predator. She was wearing a sharp navy suit that looked entirely out of place in that greasy spoon, and her silver hair was cut in a sleek bob that looked like a helmet. She was typing furiously on a tablet. I slid into the booth across from her. She didn't look up. "You look terrible, Henry," she said, her eyes still on the screen. "I feel terrible," I admitted. She finally stopped typing and looked at me. Her eyes were blue and cold, but there was a flicker of something else there. Curiosity. Maybe even a shred of leftover loyalty from the old days. "Tell me," she ordered. I told her everything. The dinner, the castles, the champagne I wasn't allowed to drink, and the badge. When I described the laminated card with the word observer, Kate's face didn't soften, it hardened. She clenched her jaw, and I saw a vein pulse at her temple. "They branded you, Henry," Kate said, her voice low and dangerous. "She actually tagged you like livestock." They laughed. Kate. Carter left. Of course he left. He's a spineless worm who married a shark. I told you this 5 years ago. I told you that woman was looking at your bank account, not your son's heart. But you said I was being cynical. "I was blind," I said, staring at the chipped Formica table. "I just wanted them to be happy. I wanted to help." Helping is giving someone a ladder, Henry. You built them an elevator and pressed a button for the penthouse. You crippled that boy. I know. And now I want to bring the building down. Kate leaned back, crossing her arms. She studied me for a moment, assessing me like a structural load. She was looking for cracks. She was looking to see if I had the stomach for what came next. "You want to sue them?" "For what?" "Emotional distress." "Good luck. Being an asshole isn't illegal in this country, Henry. If it were, half of Wall Street would be in prison." "No," I said. "I don't want to sue for feelings. I want my assets back. I want the company. I want the house." "You signed a deed of gift, Henry. I saw the paperwork. You transferred the company shares and the funds for the house. A gift is a gift. You can't take it back just because the recipient turned out to be an ingrate. That's day one of law school." "I know that's what it looked like," I said, leaning forward. "But Kate, do you remember the closing? The day we signed everything?" "I remember you telling me to leave the room so Chloe would feel comfortable," she said sourly. "Yes, but before you left, you handed me the final draft of the equity injection agreement. The $10 million one. I remember. It was a standard agreement, irrevocable transfer." I shook my head. "I changed it. Right there at the table. It was an engineer's habit. I saw structural weakness in the contract. It didn't account for load failure, so I added a rider. A handwritten clause on the last page." Kate frowned. "You added a clause without consulting me." "I did. Wrote it in blue ink." Carter and Chloe were so busy popping champagne, they didn't even read it. They just initialed the bottom of the page where I pointed. "What did you write, Henry?" Kate's voice was sharp, professional now. "I wrote that the capital was not a gift, but a demand note secured by any and all assets purchased or improved by said funds." Kate stared at me. Her mouth dropped open slightly. "A demand note?" "Yes. Do you know what that means, Henry? It means it's a loan. A zero-interest loan, maybe, but a loan that the lender can demand full repayment of at any time, for any reason, without prior notice." Kate let out a laugh that turned heads in the diner. She slapped her hand on the table, making the silverware rattle. "You old fox," she said, a grin spreading across her face. "You beautiful, paranoid old fox. You turned a multi-million-dollar gift into a ticking time bomb." "I didn't mean to," I said honestly. "I just wanted a safety valve in case Carter got divorced. In case Chloe tried to take half. I never thought I'd use it against him." "But you have it. You have the executed copy." "I don't. It's in the company safe at the office or in the filing cabinet at the house. I left with nothing, Kate." Kate's smile vanished, replaced by a look of intense concentration. She tapped the screen of her tablet, pulling up a secure cloud database. "Henry, I'm a lawyer, a good one. I scan everything. Even the documents clients tell me they don't need anymore. I keep a shadow file of every deal I touch, just in case." She scrolled furiously. My heart was pounding in my chest. If she didn't have it, if that piece of paper was gone, I was just an angry old man with $400. "Got it," she whispered. She spun the tablet around. There on the screen was a PDF of the contract from 5 years ago. On the last page in my jagged, distinctive handwriting was the clause. Capital provided herein is classified as a demand note payable immediately upon request of the lender Henry Sutton. Security interest granted in all acquired real and intellectual property. Below it were 3 sets of initials. Mine, Carter's, and Chloe's. They signed it. Kate sat tracing the signatures on the screen. They actually signed it. Probably thought it was legal jargon for tax purposes. Is it enforceable? I asked. Enforceable? Kate laughed again. Henry, this is a nuke. A demand note. It doesn't require a breach of contract. It doesn't require missed payments. It just requires you to say, pay me. And if they can't hand you 10 million in cash immediately, which I assume they can't because they're blowing it on caviar and name badges, you have the right to execute the collateral. The house, I said. The house in the exclusive zip code, the office building, the company accounts. Everything they bought with that money. We can freeze them. We can lock the doors. But we need to trigger it, I said. I need to serve them notice. Kate shook her head. Not yet. If we notify them now, they'll fight. They'll claim you forged it or that you're senile. They'll try to tie this up in court for years while they drain the accounts and hide the money offshore. We need more leverage. We need to catch them in a breach of fiduciary duty so egregious that no judge will grant them an injunction. A breach? I asked. Yes. We need proof that they aren't just ungrateful, but actively mismanaging the assets or defrauding the trust. We need to prove the collateral is in danger. That gives us the right to seize it immediately, ex parte, without a hearing. I thought about the conversation I had overheard, the strategy dinner, the new investors. They're planning something, I said. Chloe mentioned a new project, a chain of assisted living facilities. Assisted living. Kate narrowed her eyes. That's a high liability cash-heavy business. Why would a real estate tech company pivot to nursing homes? I don't know, but the Castles are investing. And they said something about needing me to sign papers next week. Kate's eyes lit up. They need your signature. Yes. So you still have power, Henry. Are you still on the board, or are you a trustee, or do they need your name for credibility? Whatever it is, that's our way in. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a fresh legal pad. She uncapped a pen with a sharp click. Here's the play, she said. You're going to play dead. You're going to be the confused, broken old man they think you are. You're going to apologize. You're going to beg for your allowance. I felt a surge of revulsion. I can't do that, Kate. You have to, she said firmly. You have to lull them into a false sense of security. You need to get back inside that house or into that office. You need to find out what this nursing home scheme is. We need evidence of malfeasance. Once we have that, we pair it with a demand note and we drop the hammer. I looked at the tablet, at the signature that was about to save my life. I looked at Kate, my shark in a navy suit. I thought about Carter's arrogant smirk. All right, I said. I'll play the observer one last time. Good, Kate said. She signaled the waitress for more coffee. Now tell me about this nursing home, because if I know Chloe, she's not buying it to help the elderly. She's buying it to bury something. Or someone. The waitress poured the coffee, the steam rising between us. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the world cold, white, and hard. I took a sip. It was bitter and burnt and tasted like fuel. I was ready. I was going back into the lion's den. Not with a whip, but with a hidden blade. And when I was done, there would be no more laughter at the dinner table. Kate leaned across the booth, her eyes locking onto mine with the intensity of a laser sight. To trigger the demand note immediately, Henry, to bypass the standard 30-day cure period and the inevitable injunctions their lawyers will file, we need something concrete. We need proof of active malfeasance. We need to show a judge that the collateral, your house, your company, your legacy, is in imminent danger of being dissipated or destroyed. Rumors about a nursing home deal aren't enough. We need the contracts. We need the loan applications. We need to see exactly how they're funding this. Because if I know Carter, he doesn't have the liquidity to buy a lemonade stand, let alone a healthcare chain. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settling into my bones. Malfeasance was a sterile legal term for betrayal. Kate explained that if we could prove they were acting recklessly with the assets, leveraging them in a way that violated fiduciary duty or the terms of the trust, We could strike ex parte. That meant we could get a court order to freeze everything before they even knew we were coming. It was a preemptive strike, a way to decapitate their financial power in a single move. But it required evidence. Hard, undeniable documentary evidence. I knew where that evidence lived. It wasn't in public records yet. It was in the digital shadows of Sutton Innovations. It was on the hard drives and servers I had purchased in the office building I had designed. I told Kate I would get it. She looked at me skeptically, taking in my shaking hands and the exhaustion etched into my face, but she didn't stop me. She knew as well as I did that there was no other way. We couldn't subpoena it without tipping our hand. I had to become a spy in the empire I had built. I spent Sunday waiting. The waiting was the hardest part. It gave my mind too much time to replay the scene at the dinner table. The sound of the badge hitting the porcelain, the look of utter contempt on Chloe's face. I sat in my truck parked in a public lot, watching the city turn from gray to black as the sun went down. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I was 77 years old. A man who should have been bouncing grandkids on his knee or reading by a fire. Instead, I was checking the battery on a flashlight and reviewing the floor plans of my office building in my head, preparing to break into a place where my name was on the lobby plaque. At 10 p.m. on Sunday, I made my move. The business district was deserted, a canyon of steel and glass echoing with the winter wind. I parked my truck 3 blocks away in the shadow of a parking structure to avoid the license plate readers in the main garage. The walk to the building was brutal. The wind cut through my coat, beating my exposed skin, reminding me of my frailty. But with every step, the cold hardened my resolve. I wasn't doing this for money anymore. I was doing it for survival. I approached the side entrance, the one used by the cleaning crews and night engineers. This was the first test. Carter had been CEO for 5 years. A competent CEO would have updated security protocols, issued new keycards, scrubbed the access list of former employees. But Carter wasn't competent. He was comfortable. He was lazy. He assumed that because he sat in the big chair, the world would simply bend to his will without him having to manage the details. I pulled my plastic keycard from my wallet. It was frayed at the edges, the photo faded. I held it up to the black card reader mounted on the brick wall. I held my breath. If the light flashed red, an alarm might trigger. The police would come. I'd be arrested for trespassing on my own property. It would be the final humiliation. I tapped the card. There was a pause, a heartbeat of silence that felt like an hour. Then a cheerful electronic chirp. The tiny LED light blinked from angry red to welcoming green. The magnetic lock released with a heavy clunk. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Lazy. He was so incredibly lazy. He hadn't purged the system in 5 years. I was still in the system. I was still the owner, at least to the building's electronic brain. I slipped inside the heavy door, pulling it shut quietly behind me. The air inside was warm and smelled of industrial floor wax and ozone. It was a familiar smell, the smell of work of progress. But tonight it felt alien. I moved quickly toward the service elevator, bypassing the main lobby where the night watchman sat. I knew the schedule. Old Gustavo retired 2 years ago. The new security company was cheap. They did rounds every hour on the hour. It was 10:15. I had 45 minutes before anyone walked the 14th floor. The elevator ride was smooth and silent. I watched the numbers climb my reflection in the polished steel doors staring back at me. A tired old man in a thrift store coat. When the doors slid open on the 14th floor, the executive suite was bathed in the soft blue glow of emergency lights and the standby LEDs of printers and monitors. It was quiet, a tomb of commerce. I walked down the hall, my steps muffled by the plush carpet I had picked out a decade ago. I passed the conference room where I had signed the papers transferring the company. I passed the break room where I used to drink coffee with the interns. I reached the corner office. My office. Now, Carter's office. I tested the handle. Locked. Of course. Carter might be lazy with building security, but he was paranoid about his own privacy. I didn't panic. I turned to the desk just outside the heavy oak doors. The executive assistant's station. Rosa used to sit here. She was a fortress of organization. But Rosa had retired the year after I left, pushed out by Chloe for being too old school. The new assistant was a young woman named Kelly. I had met her once. She seemed more interested in her Instagram account than in file management. I hoped she was as careless as her boss. I walked around the desk and sat in the ergonomic chair. I woke the computer monitor. A password prompt appeared. I pulled open the top drawer. Pens, lip gloss, a stress ball. No sticky notes. I checked under the keyboard. Nothing. I felt a spike of adrenaline. If I couldn't get in, this was all for nothing. I looked at the personal photos pinned to the fabric cubicle divider. A dog, a golden retriever. A boyfriend. A birthday party banner that said 25. I tried the password 123. Failed. I tried Sutton 2023. Failed. One more try before the system locked me out. I looked at the photo of the dog again. There was a tiny name tag on the collar visible in the picture. Buster. I typed Buster 1. Access denied. I took a deep breath. Think like a 25-year-old who hates cybersecurity. I typed Buster 123. The screen flickered and the Windows desktop appeared. I slumped back in the chair, sweat trickling down my spine despite the air conditioning. I was in. I wasted no time. I went straight to the email client. Kelly managed Carter's inbox. She filtered everything. If there were loan documents, she would have seen them. I typed Casto into the search bar. Dozens of emails popped up. Most were about dinner reservations or golf tee times. Useless. Then I searched loan. The results changed. Mortgage refinance, line of credit. And then, near the top, an email from a sender named Apex Capital Partners. The subject line was urgent. Hard money loan terms, sunset acquisition. Hard money. My stomach churned. You only go to hard money lenders when the banks laugh you out of the room. The interest rates were predatory, the terms draconian. It was the financial equivalent of a loan shark in a suit. I opened the email. Attached was a PDF. I opened it. It was a $5 million loan agreement. The interest rate was 14%. 14. It was insanity. But it was the collateral section that made my vision blur with rage. Listed under secured assets were 3 items. The commercial property at 100 Sutton Street, the headquarters we were standing in, the residential estate in the exclusive zip code, and the 100% pledge of voting shares of Sutton Innovations. They were betting the farm. They were leveraging every brick I had laid to get $5 million in cash. But why? What was worth risking the entire empire? I went back to the search bar. I typed sunset. I found an email chain between Chloe and her mother, Mrs. Castle. The subject was the plan. I clicked it. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely control the mouse. Mom, Chloe wrote, we got the Apex approval. The $5 million clears on Friday. We used 3.5 to buy the Sunset End facility in Newark. It's a distressed sale. The place is a dump, literally falling apart. Tons of violations, which is why it's cheap. We slap a coat of paint on it, rebrand it as part of the Sutton Care network, and boom, the valuation triples for the IPO. I read on. The next paragraph stopped my heart. And the best part is the occupancy issue. We need to fill beds to show revenue. Carter solved it. We moved the observer into the memory care wing at Sunset. We declare him incompetent. We have a doctor who will sign off on rapid onset dementia caused by the stress of his financial failures. Once he's inside, we have a power of attorney over his pension and social security to pay the fees. It covers the overhead for the first year. He won't know the difference. The place is a hellhole, but who cares? He'll be medicated. I stared at the screen. The white light burned my retinas. They weren't just stealing the company. They weren't just taking the house. They were planning to traffic me. They were going to mortgage my life's work to buy a dilapidated nursing home, a place known for neglect and abuse, a place where people went to die alone on soiled sheets, and they were going to lock me inside it. They were going to use my own pension to pay for my imprisonment. I felt a cold spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the weather. This wasn't just greed. This was evil. It was a calculated, dehumanizing evil born of absolute entitlement. They didn't see a father. They saw a resource to be harvested and discarded. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a USB drive I had brought. I plugged it in. I dragged the email, every loan document, every architectural scan of the Sunset End facility onto the drive. I watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. 90%. 95%. Suddenly, the elevator dinged. I froze. It was 10:40. The guard wasn't supposed to be here for another 20 minutes. I heard heavy footsteps on the marble floor of the lobby. A flashlight beam cut through the glass walls of the executive suite, swinging wildly. "Hello? Anyone in there?" A voice called out. It wasn't the usual guard. It was someone younger, nervous. I yanked the USB drive out. I didn't have time to shut the computer down properly. I just killed the monitor, slipped out of the chair, and crouched low behind the desk. The footsteps got closer. The beam of light swept over the cubicle walls, dancing on the ceiling. I saw a monitor light up. The guard muttered to himself. He was close. I could hear the jingle of his keys now. I pressed myself into the footwell of the desk, pulling my legs in tight. If he walked around the desk, if he shined the light down, it was over. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The footsteps stopped right at the entrance to the cubicle. The light played over the surface of the desk. It stopped on the mouse I had left slightly skewed. "Damn computers," the guard grumbled, always waking up. He didn't come around. He turned. I heard his boots retreating down the hall. I waited until the elevator dinged again and the doors closed before I dared to exhale. I stood up, my legs trembling. I had the drive. I had the proof. They were mortgaging the company to buy a house of horrors, and they had reserved the first room for me. I slipped the drive into my inside pocket right next to my heart. It felt heavy as a stone. I headed for the stairwell. I wasn't going to risk the elevator again. I walked down 14 flights of stairs, every step a promise. They wanted to put me in a home. I was going to take theirs. I was going to take everything. I drove straight to Kate O'Malley's office. It was located in a converted warehouse in the industrial district, a space that was all exposed brick and aggressive modern art. It fit her perfectly. It was past midnight when I arrived, but the lights were on. Kate didn't sleep when she smelled blood in the water. I placed a USB drive on her glass desk. It looked insignificant, just a small piece of plastic. But we both knew it held enough radioactive material to level a city block. Kate plugged it in without a word. I sat in the leather chair across from her, my hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the break-in. I watched her face as she clicked through the files. I saw her eyes widen when she opened the Apex Capital loan agreement. I saw her jaw tighten when she read the interest rate. But it was the email chain, the one about the Sunset End facility and the memory care wing, that made her stop. She read it once. Then she read it again. Then she slowly took off her reading glasses and looked at me. "Henry," she said, her voice quiet and deadly, "this isn't just fraud. This is conspiracy to commit kidnapping. They are planning to traffic you into a facility to defraud the government and seize your pension." "I know." I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "They want to put me in a home, Kate. A home where people go to be forgotten." "This is it," she said, tapping the screen. "This is the proof of malfeasance. We can go to a judge tomorrow. We can get the injunction. We can stop the loan." "But that's not enough," I said. "If we stop the loan now, they'll just find another lender. They'll spin it. They'll say they were trying to help me, that I needed care. They'll paint me as the senile old man who doesn't understand high finance. I don't just want to stop them, Kate. I want to end them. I want to expose them so thoroughly they can never do this to anyone else." Kate leaned back. "You want the nuclear option?" she said. "I want the scorched earth option," I corrected. She nodded slowly, a small smile playing on her lips. "Then we need more. This email is damning, but it's just words on a screen. Defense attorneys will argue it was a hypothetical, a worst-case scenario discussion. We need them to act on it. We need them to try to execute the plan. We need them to hand you the pen." "Hand me the pen," I asked. "Yes. We need them to admit the gold is a conservatorship. We need them to present you with the paperwork stripping you of your rights. If they try to make you sign a power of attorney or a voluntary commitment form, especially in a public setting where they're trying to gain credibility, that's the nail in the coffin. It proves intent. It proves they are actively moving to incapacitate you for financial gain. So I have to set a trap, I realized. You have to make them believe you're beaten, Kate said. You have to be the broken old man they want you to be. You have to give them the green light.
I felt a wave of nausea. The idea of bowing to Carter, of pretending to submit to Chloe, made my skin crawl. But I remembered the badge. Observer. I remembered the laughter. I pulled out my phone.
It was 1 a.m. Carter would be asleep, or maybe he'd be awake worrying about his $5 million loan. I didn't care. I dialed his number. It rang 5 times before he answered. His voice was thick with sleep and irritation. "Dad, it's 1 a.m., he groaned. "What is it now? Are you still at the motel?"